This is Edgar Velázquez Reynald interviewing Vivian Thai on July 1st, 2025 at 10:10 a.m. Central Standard Time for the Voices of SMU Oral History Project. This interview is being recorded using Zoom. I am located in Dallas, Texas. Miss Thai, where are you located?
I'm located in Garland, Texas.
Great, thank you. Well, first off, good morning, and thank you again for participating in our project. To begin, can you start off by establishing your connection to SMU, so the years that you attended and your degree and field of study?
Yeah, for sure. So I attended SMU from August 2021 through May 2025. I was a double major in biological sciences and health and society, and I received a bachelor's of science for both of those. And I was also a minor in human rights.
Great, thank you. Now, can you tell me when and where were you born?
Yeah, I was born in Dallas, and I grew up in Garland, so pretty close by. I'm local to the area. And so it was interesting that I chose to go to college there too. But yeah, I grew up in Garland, Texas. I went to Garland High School, um, and I'm in Garland right now, so I'm at home.
Okay, great. And could you describe your neighborhood in Garland for me, please?
Yeah, for sure. So for the first part of my childhood up until like around middle school, I was in a different part of Garland than I am now, but I lived kind of close to Firewheel, if you know what that is, like the mall. And it was very nice. Like the neighbors and my dad were always friends, and so we would have a lot of fun together. Um, and in the current house that I'm in now, we moved around middle school years. Um, they have it's like another really nice neighborhood. We have like little block parties, and so it's been pretty. I don't know. I would say like I had a great childhood growing up in Garland. I moved schools quite a bit. Like I moved from two different elementary schools. And so that was kind of interesting. But yeah, that's sets the scene, I guess, of where I grew up.
Great. Yes, thank you. And what can you tell me about your family?
Yeah, so I have a family of four. My younger sister's actually attending SMU right now. She's a rising junior, so we're 2 years apart. Though we've always been super close. And then my parents immigrated from Vietnam to America, and they both went to college here. Um, but my parents b worked at Texas Instruments for a while, and then now my dad works at a different spot. But for the longest time in my life, they worked at TI for like 20 years. And so they were very STEM engineer vibes. But I'm also very close to my extended family, especially my cousins on my mom's side, because we're just all kind of close in age. And so that's been really fun growing up and getting to hang out with them all the time. I felt like I always had built-in friends everywhere. So yeah.
That's good. And did your parents meet here or were they already together in Vietnam?
Oh, I think they met here. They actually met in Texas. So that's kind of cool too.
That's very nice. And that's great to hear that, you're very tight-knit with your family and your extended family. Um, does your extended family live all around the DFW area?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate because almost all of my family lives in Dallas, and so it's always just like a short, like 15-minute drive away. My cousins are mostly in Plano, and one lived in like Highland Park, so close to SMU. So I've always had the opportunity to see them, see my grandparents also. They live in like Richardson. Everyone's within DFW, so that's really nice.
Nice. So you mentioned, growing up in Garland and always being in Garland. How has Garland changed over the years, if it has?
That's a really interesting question. Mm, I'm I'm not sure. I think in the past there was like just from like me going, I feel like there's not that much to do in Garland, but every day there's like more business coming in Garland, more things to do here. Um, which is interesting. And I feel like Garland has been on the map more, or I don't know if it's just my personal experience, but in the past, if I was to meet somebody from like, I don't know, another suburb or whatever, and they didn't really know what Garland was or anything about it. But I think maybe it's just because like we go to SMU that sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm just from Garland, and they like immediately know where that is. So that's kind of interesting to me. Um, but in terms of change, I'm not really sure. I feel like I was kind of in a bubble in some sense. Like I just went like to school, went home, and I didn't really experience Garland, even though I grew up there my entire life. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
Oh, good. That's great. Thank you. Um, and then you mentioned, being Vietnamese. Are you, aside from your family and extended family, are you part of a rich, Vietnamese community?
I would definitely say so. I think that's actually one of the reasons why my parents decided to settle in Garland. There's a huge Vietnamese community in North Texas, in Garland specifically. And there is so much to do in the community. I'm Buddhist, and so I go to a temple in Garland, and that's a big sense of community there. And also growing up, I attended like Vietnamese Sunday school at a local community college. And so that school is full of other, children of Vietnamese immigrants, and all of the teachers are volunteers, which is amazing. And my parents are really involved with that school. And so I think growing up, I've always felt very much tied to Vietnamese culture, so much so that when I was in college, I wanted to, well, for more context, I'm a pre-med and I've always been interested in like health, public health and healthcare disparities and healthcare equity.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to look more into like that sense of public health and health equity in the Vietnamese sphere.
Mhm.
And I did a research project in Vietnam as part of the Richter Fellowship my senior year in during winter break. And so I think that too tied me really even more closely to my Vietnamese community because I had to reach out to a lot of people that I knew here in Garland, just to get their insight before I went to Vietnam and did research. And then also in next month, I'm actually moving to Vietnam. So I feel like all of those, all of those different things, have, I don't know, the Vietnamese community in Garland has definitely shaped, my identity, and the sense of community here is definitely one of the driving factors for me to pursue teaching in Vietnam, but also like advocating for the Vietnamese community in like the healthcare side of things, especially because that's what I want to do in my future career.
Yes, thank you. And we'll definitely get to, your work and moving to Vietnam. But I guess since we're on the topic, I if you don't mind me asking, since you know advocacy and working with healthcare disparities is so important to you, what sort of disparities have you experienced or witnessed in your community that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think the biggest disparity definitely is like access, because a lot of Vietnamese Americans in my parents' generation and maybe the older generations do not have the adequate knowledge about the American healthcare system. And they also, just like this is from personal experience, so I'm not sure this is like a sweeping generalization, but a lot of them also don't have the necessary language capabilities to properly communicate with a provider or like in the healthcare sphere. So I think that having more Vietnamese doctors, having more translators, and just like an easier way for immigrants of all color to access the healthcare that they need is important. And I also think it's like making sure that people know that Western medicine and biomedicine is complementary to the alternative forms of medicine that they prefer to use in their own culture.
Mhm.
Growing up, my grandma always had her own, her own alternative medicines and ways of doing things that she didn't feel comfortable using some of the Western medicine or like
Mhm.
being part of the American hospital system. And so I feel like that is a disparity in itself, like people not having the access and not having the knowledge to know that, oh, you can do both of these things. Um, and I also think like I worked in a as a patient coordinator at Medical City Dallas for a couple of years. And I was the only person working on Saturdays, which means that I was like translating between like English and Spanish, and my Spanish was
Mhm.
not great. It was very like middle school, elementary like type Spanish. for those that were going to get their MRI scans. And then there was this one occasion where a Vietnamese patient came in and I was the only one who was able to translate. And my Vietnamese is like by no means perfect either. And so I think it's just like to my then me thinking to myself, if I was not there on that specific Saturday, like what would they have done? Just, so many people travel so far just to get a scan or just to get a procedure done, and then they're turned around because they their language, like their English is just not enough to get them through whatever they have to do. And it's really unfortunate that those disparities still exist today, I feel like, because our technology is so great and there could be so many diverse people that we're bringing in to help combat that problem. That was a very long-winded answer, but
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. And while you were speaking, I started thinking, and this question is based on my own experience, as a Mexican American. So, because you mentioned translating, and that translating kind of falls on a lot of first generation children in Mexican
Mhm.
American communities where they have to translate what doctors are saying. And, um, that's very difficult, and it's a lot of pressure put on children because they don't know like these like terms. And so I wonder if in the disparities that you've discussed, uh is that similar for Vietnamese children?
Definitely. I would say so.
Hmm.
And there's so many, like you were saying, there's so many terms that you don't know as a kid. There's so many terms that I still don't know now.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's just it's like a very normalized part of growing up as
Hmm.
like the children of immigrants in America that people don't talk about as much, and no one thinks it's weird until you talk to people that are like, "Oh, I never had to do that." And then you're like, "Oh." So, yeah, I think that's very common among um the children of immigrants in America, regardless of whether you're Mexican or Vietnamese or whatnot. But
Yes, absolutely. Okay,
yeah,
great. Well, thank you for sharing that.
of course.
Okay, so let's get back to your childhood. Um, what was a normal day like at home for you? And you could pick like any memory at any age that you'd like.
Yeah. So I'll maybe talk about like elementary school. When I was younger, my parents were working really insane hours. So they were working, I think, both like 12-hour shifts. And so I didn't actually see them that much because after school, they were still working, so they couldn't pick me up from school. Um, and so after school, I'd go to my grandma's house, and that was literally how I spent almost all of my elementary years and some of my middle school years as well. Um, I would just go to school and then go to my grandparents' house, and my sister and I would just be doing random stuff. Like we would be playing or watching shows or just mostly just hanging out with my grandparents, which I really appreciate now, getting to spend that much time with them as I did. I never really thought about it as like I didn't think it was like sad that I didn't get to see my parents so much because I had so much fun, I think, with my grandparents. And also some of my cousins would come over sometimes, or if I was lucky, my parents would let me go to my friend's house after school instead of my grandparents' house. So that was pretty much my childhood. And then after dinner, like after 7, which is when they would get back, then I would go home to my house and then have dinner with my parents. And so I think it was a really great mix of getting to see all these people. And I also think it helped me like be closer to my extended family a lot. Um, and I still am. And so that was basically what it was like a day in my life back in elementary school.
Yes, great. Thank you. Um, let's see. We already discussed school, and since we were talking about your culture, and Garland, um, was there ever a time where you like really mm, became aware of race relations at some point in your life growing up in Garland?
I think, yes, kind of. I went to Garland High School. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Garland High School. Garland High School has a very like I think the majority of students are Hispanic, or it's like a lot more. Yeah, it's like I don't know what the term is. Is it minority, my majority, or something like that?
Yes. Mhm.
Yes, where the majority of the students were students of color, and also the majority of the students were Hispanic. And I honestly was that was pretty normal to me. I think like growing up, I've always been in a diverse setting. And so going into Garland High School, I wasn't really, that was something that I never thought about. I
Mhm.
never thought about it actually until much later when I went to SMU and I was like, whoa, this is a completely different demographic of people. And I was part of the Connect program, which is great. Like I was able to go to school a little bit early and meet so many of my friends who are also students of color. Um, but yeah, I don't think I truly was aware of that until I went to college
Mhm.
because growing up, I've always been surrounded by the really like large Vietnamese American community in Garland. And then when I went to high school, it was just like other minority students, and I was like, oh, this is very normal. And the first time I really thought about it was when I went to SMU, and I felt like, wow, this is a completely different environment and different setting.
Mhm.
Um, and I also didn't think that much about how that, like, how me being Asian versus me being whatever race would affect me and like the field that I want to go into or like the things that I want to do on campus
Mhm.
were, t I don't know, like I didn't think about how that was tied to race until I went to college and I like was wondering, oh, like, is this like a microaggression or is this just normal? And I just never know, like, things
Mhm.
like that, like smaller things. But I don't think I've ever been like outright discriminated against. It's just like, when you think about things and it's like, I don't know.
Yes, no, I understand.
Yeah.
So I guess since you already mentioned SMU, when you were in high school and, figuring out what you wanted to study, like how did you become aware of SMU or were you aware of SMU?
Yeah. I had this be on my map just because it was in like Dallas kind of,
Mhm.
but at my school we were challenged to go to the Tate lectures, like the Tate student
Hmm.
forums, the Tate lectures for extra credit. And so I really wanted extra credit, and so I would go to SMU and I remember thinking this campus is absolutely gorgeous. And that was I think maybe in like 10th grade or 11th grade. So I was already kind of thinking about college a little bit. And that was how it was on my map. And then I remember going to the Junior Van Cliburn, which is like an international piano competition. And I was just going there to watch the pianists, and that was also at SMU. And so I think like I just had like random occasions to go to SMU, and because of that, it was always on my map. But for my parents, they really wanted me to stay local. So
Mhm.
because of that, I mean, I applied to a lot of different places, but I think in my heart, I always knew that I was gonna probably stay in Dallas. So for me, it was kind of like a UT Dallas versus SMU situation when I was a senior. Um, but I just liked the culture of SMU a lot, and I liked how this sounds so shallow, but how gorgeous it was, and I felt like I could envision my life there.
Mhm.
Um, and then like some scholarships too. So all of those factors led me to SMU, which yeah.
Great, great, thank you. And I guess during the whole application process, like did SMU recruit you or what was your experience like with the application process?
Yeah, I remember applying really early. They had a fee waiver or something like that, where if you applied early, they would, you wouldn't have to pay for the application. So I did it really early on, and I'm not sure if I applied for like some additional scholarships, like scholars program, but I ended up getting invited to become a Dedman College Scholar, and that really sold me on the program because um my year at the beginning was a very small group. There was only around 8 of us, I think, and they added more later on. But there was only 8 of us, and I got to talk to some of the other people that were accepted, and it was just such a nice, close-knit group, and everyone seemed really great. And I was like, wow, like I feel like I could really see myself here. Um, and so one thing that stuck out to me about SMU throughout the entire application process was how personalized it was and how like every time I came onto different panels or webinars or whatnot, I would see the same people over and over. And it would make me so happy. I'm like, oh, this is like a close-knit school. And I feel like it's like an actual community and they're not just recruiting me. I'm not one of like 50,000 students or whatever.
Mhm.
So I think like the smaller size of it really sold me. But the application process, I think I didn't commit fully until May, but I knew by like November, like very early on that I was probably going to go to SMU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. And then, once you actually came to SMU, you know, what were your expectations like coming into it, and did SMU meet those expectations?
Yeah, I think the expectations that I went into, I honestly really wanted to like rebrand my personal image going from high school to college. I think in high school I was very introverted and like I was involved, but I was a pretty introverted kid. And so going into SMU, my expectations were I want to get involved in so many things. I want to really like give myself a college experience where I tried everything at least once and I had an open mind and I would take every opportunity that I could find. And honestly, now reflecting back, I think that I did do those things and I did meet those expectations by, chasing all these different opportunities that SMU had to offer. In terms of SMU itself, I knew that SMU was a PWI. I knew that there was a certain stereotype, I guess, associated with it.
Mhm.
And that's what I was expecting. And I was kind of nervous for that. That's on like half the reason why I joined Connect because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And I was like, when researching online, people say certain things about the school and, there's this like bias around it. And so I was really nervous about that. And I was like scared that I wasn't going to fit in or like I wouldn't have any friends or people would all be in Greek life. And I wasn't super interested in that. And so I was really nervous about those. And I kind of expected that. And so now reflecting back on it, I think that while there is some truth to some of those expectations, I think that SMU for me was what I made of it. And I shouldn't have been so nervous or so scared and that like my experience is going to be fine. I was going to be able to find my people and things like that. So, yeah, in that sense, my expectations weren't true, I guess, that you could still have a good time at SMU even if you don't fit in certain categories.
Great. Well, thank you. And so you're already touching on this, but student advocacy and community building are very important to you. Um, so and it already sounds like you already had those values, like as you were growing up. But how did SMU help to further nurture those values?
I think that, hmm, I think when it comes to student advocacy, if you are in a smaller group, then or maybe not everyone, but I felt personally responsible to, speak up for or advocate for the group that I'm a part of. So, for example, I'm a pre-health student, and there's an organization on campus called the Minority Association of Pre-Health Students. And so for me, I joined that organization as a freshman, as a member. And I was like, wow, this organization does so much to help uplift other pre-health students, specifically minority pre-health students. And I really loved that mission about it. And so I joined the board and I was president this past year. And I think that being part of the community and seeing how much it's helped you really inspires you and motivates you to give back to it and continue advocating for people that are in your shoes or have been in your shoes. Um, and I also think that SMU, you know, relatively does a good job of giving students spaces to advocate for what they believe in. I joined Student Senate as a freshman, and I was in Student Senate for like 3 years.
Mhm.
Um, and obviously it's like difficult to speak up in front of like a chamber. It's hard to put your voice out there. But the fact that something like Senate exists and there are different committees on Senate and there are different roles, like I was not the Asian American senator, but there is an Asian American senator. That helps a lot to give visibility to students that, need that are in groups that are smaller on campus and could benefit from student advocacy. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. Yes, thank you. And this was your final year. Um, and so, there's a lot of talk about DEI and dismantling it. Did you see any effects in the Student Senate this last semester?
Yeah, I wasn't in Senate for my last year, so
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not sure. But I think like just in general, there's been a lot
Mhm.
of talks about it. Um, Especially in, I've been involved in MAPS, which is tied to minority students and among other things. And so even when I talk to some of my mentors on campus, um, everyone is just feeling defeated, I guess, and kind of uncertain about everything, which really sucks. But I think that SMU, I don't know. It's a lot. It was really crazy having all of this on my senior year because I feel like I've worked very personally, I've like worked really hard to build up certain communities that I really care about. And it's like a little bit like a punch to the gut when you see what's happening nationwide. But I
Mhm.
think like talking to my mentors on campus makes me feel a lot better about the situation because there are certain things that have protected students for a long time, and we all we can do is just like keep fighting and hope that they will continue to protect students of color on campus, even amidst all of the, things that are going on in the country. So
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and then, well, you already mentioned two organizations that you were involved with, but you also founded the SMU chapter of Circle K International. Can you, well, first describe what Circle K International is and why it was important for you to develop a chapter here?
yeah. So Circle K International is a huge organization. It's the largest collegiate level service organization um in the world, I think, or at least in the United States. But I wanted to develop a chapter here because I felt like SMU had some great volunteering opportunities, but there were no opportunities for college student volunteers to connect with other college student volunteers from other campuses. And that
Mhm.
was one of the strongest tenets of CKI is fellowship. And so I really wanted SMU students who are volunteering to have an opportunity to find like-minded volunteers at other campuses. One of my closest friends is really involved with the CKI chapter at UT Dallas. And so talking to her really inspired me to bring that chapter to SMU. And I also think that while there are really great opportunities at SMU currently for volunteering at the time, there were not enough to that had the fellowship component and also that type of like mentoring and scholarship and all of those other things. So the three tenets of CKI are service, fellowship, and scholarship. Or and I feel like having students be volunteering but also being part of a larger network because our family branch or like our parent organization is Kiwanis. And so having students connected to other students at other universities, having students connected to community members, around DFW, and having students connected to the parent organization, which is Kiwanis, which is another organization, like another volunteering organization of people that are like older, like after college, was really important to me. And that's why I wanted to bring CKI to SMU. Um, but I personally, CKI was like my little passion project as well. I was a Castle Fellow, and that's how I started like bringing CKI up. And it was so cool and so fulfilling to be able to personally reach out to different nonprofits that I've heard of around Dallas and to actually do something tangible to help them. Um, and I also had a really great team working with CKI, and so all of us together would reach out to different areas in need around Dallas, and start developing relationships with them. And I think that definitely CKI is one of the most fulfilling things that I've done throughout my time at SMU because I I don't know, it was just one of the ways that I felt like I could give back to SMU, not only SMU, but the greater DFW community and connect students to other students that, might like volunteering like them. So yeah.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. Great. So we've already discussed, your extracurriculars, although I'm sure there's plenty more to discuss. But I do want to get to your fields of study, biological sciences, health and society, and human rights. First, can you, describe what your programs were like? What did you like about them? And if there's anything that, you didn't like, if you were willing to share that. Yes, please.
Yeah. So I used to be a biology, health and society, and human rights like triple, and I just kind of couldn't
Mhm.
handle it anymore. I was like, this is too much. But in terms of like biology, I think that uh excuse me, as a pre-med, biology sets you up really well, to be honest. Like it hits all the different prerequisites, and I've always been interested in science and in biology specifically. And so going into college, I was actually biochemistry, and then I realized that biochemistry is more chemistry than biology, and so I switched to
Mm,
biology, which is what I actually liked more. The programs in biology are great. I love the biology professors at SMU, specifically Dr. DeBrot, incredible man, incredible professor. And so I think that I had so much support in the biology department. Um, but in terms of like community, I think health and society has just always been my favorite major. When
mm,
I applied to SMU, I selected it as my first choice major because I knew that I wanted to hit all my pre-med prerequisites, of course, but I also wanted a more holistic approach to studying science and studying medicine. And I think that for me, health and society really checked all of those boxes because yes, your science classes count towards the health and society major, especially on like the physiological track that I did. But it allowed me to learn about medical anthropology and some of my human rights classes also tied into health and society. So it was really important to me that the curriculum reflected both the more medical anthropology, the more holistic parts of medicine, and gave me the science foundation to back it up. And also in health and society, it's kind of a smaller major. I don't really know how many people are in it, but I feel like the health and society, other health and society majors also share that same sentiment with me. And we've kind of found our little community among that.
mhm,
All of the research, like some of the yeah, all of the research that I've done independently have also been in health and society. And so my advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Burke, who was the health and society, I'm not sure if she's the chair, but she was up there this past year. She's been such an amazing help. And I really, really love all of the health and society professors in the program. I this past year while doing research with them, the Vietnam research I did was part of my health and society distinction. That
mhm.
was also really great and too. So I just really, really love the health and society program so much. So my absolute favorite. Like every time I talk on a panel for like prospective students, I always make sure to plug health and society. So yeah. And then human rights is also amazing. I think that for me, I didn't really know too much about human rights until it became like a sophomore or junior. And because of that, I just couldn't fit in the entire major. But wait, give me once. I think I'm gonna go
Yeah.
plug in my computer because
Okay.
it's like not charging. Oh, 1 second.
Okay, I'm gonna press pause, so go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. So, yes, I didn't know that much about human rights until my sophomore or junior year, which makes me so sad because I think that maybe if I like really wove it into starting as a freshman, I could have incorporated that too as a major. But I think the human rights program is amazing. It is so tight-knit. Um, this past this past semester, I actually took the capstone for the human rights major, even though it was a minor. I took it as an elective. And
Mhm,
it was such a great class. I think it is so applicable to everything that's going on in the world right now. And I think that the human rights professors like Dr. Klein, Dr. Halpern, they make an effort to make everything that we're learning about relevant to everything that's going on. And think that for me, even though I am sad that I didn't take more human rights classes earlier, I think that wrapping up my last semester at SMU full of human rights classes was just a really great way to end it off because I finished my biology major, I think, as a junior. And so this last year was really human rights focused and health and society stuff. And that was really fun. So I really love the human rights program. I think it's so great that SMU is only one of, I think, 11 programs in the country that has something like that.
Great, that's great to hear. Thank you. And so, now hearing about like your programs and your extracurriculars, can you walk me through a typical day as a student here?
Yeah. So typically, or like for me, or just like in general.
For you, like,
Okay. Mm, I think I would go through like a typical day, like when I was like a sophomore, because I think that was when I was doing a lot of stuff. And
sure.
so I would wake up, go to class. I would try to schedule my classes to end around noon because I had other extracurriculars going on. And so I would try to finish classes around noon or so. And then I would go to my research lab. I spent a lot of time in Dr. Soltowski's circadian clock research group. And so I would go to lab, probably put something in that needs to sit for a while. And then I'd go to Senate, which was always at like 3 or 3:30. And so I'd go to Senate and then I'd probably go back to lab. And that was pretty much my day. Like I'd try to schedule classes kind of earlier on in the morning, so that I could do my research and other extracurriculars later on. And then in the like in the evening, like 6 or 7, there was always some other meeting going on, whether it was like for maps or I was in program council for a bit. So like it's just like kind of random
Mhm.
depending on the day. But that was the general breakdown. And then I'd go home because I never lived on campus. I received a housing exemption. And so at the end of the day, I'd just go home.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's like a typical day in my life.
Great, thank you. And what does self-care look like for you?
Hmm. I think that so right now I'm trying to get back more into like tennis and running and more athletic things. That is definitely one of my forms of self-care, or going to like a yoga or Pilates class. I think it's so fun to be able to, I don't know, like not do something that's not for my career or not for school or whatever. Like it's just like
Yeah.
for fun and for myself. So I would consider those forms of self-care. I think like, and I'm still working on this, but I also just like doom scroll quite a bit. I'm not so sure if that's self-care, but I think it's also something to like look forward to. It's like I can just turn off my brain, just like scroll on TikTok for an hour or so. And
Mm,
so there's just some forms. And I also, especially in college, got into journaling a lot. I
mm,
think that it was a really good outlet for me just to write, not even to a specific audience. Like I don't even read anything later on. I just write it and like close it, but at least it's like one way for me to get my thoughts out there and just, de-stress for the day. So that was one of those things. And then I also got into like bullet journaling. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but
yeah,
with like the stickers and like the washi tape, like all of those things. So that was really fun for me too. And it was also a creative outlet in addition to being, like a self-care method.
great, thank you. Um, well, as I said, you're very successful, but what is there anything that you feel limited your success as a student?
I So earlier I said that when I was like in high school going to college, I wanted to be a lot more extrovert. I wanted to get more involved, things like that. I think that for the first 2 years, personally, when I was in college, I think I just did way too much and I spread
Mm,
myself super thin.
mhm,
And because of that, I don't think that I think I could have made more impact at SMU or as a person and just felt better about myself if I picked less things to do, but really like spent time on them.
mm,
And so I think in that way I limited myself, because I was just trying to do everything all at once and it just never works out. I mean, unless you're like a superhuman, but I'm like definitely not. And so I think that was one of the ways I limited myself. And I also like typical things, like I let my grades slip a little bit and like things like that. And I really regret that. I wish I just like was more intentional about every single thing. Well, I tried to be, but at the end of the day, I still cared too much. So even more intentional about the things that I was super involved in, and about getting a good balance. Because I think like I also restricted myself by I wouldn't say to the point of burnout, but like kind of burnout, like every day, like I would have the classes that I'd have like all of like research and then I'd have the the meetings or whatever. And it was kind of like it was just exhausting at some point and I was like, okay, like this is really hard. And so I think like my upperclassmen years, like junior, senior, I was a lot more cognizant of what I could and could not take on. Um, and that helped a lot. So yeah, I guess I restricted myself in that way as a sophomore and
mhm.
freshman.
Great, thank you. So let's see. I kind of wrote a very long question, but it revolves around your project or taking part in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, um, John R. Lewis Undergraduate Public Health Scholars Program at the University of Pittsburgh School of Public Health. And you did that in 2024, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So can you share what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. I was super, super excited for this experience. First off, I was like, oh my God, it's the CDC. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
So in the realm of public health, that's crazy. But second, I was just very excited to do something like hands-on, like really hands-on public health because I've, taken the health and society classes and done some research in public health, but I was never like in the field like doing things before the summer of 2024. So the CDC program is a partnership between seven different universities, and I went to the Pittsburgh site, I guess. And in the program, you learn about public health. So they give you coursework and homework and all those types of things. And then you get to do like, you get to hear people on panels and visit different sites in the city. So that was really fun too, because I, health and society is a great major, but it's not the traditional public health major that most universities had. And so I was kind of like interested in I don't know, what other parts of public health I haven't explored yet. So those classes were great. In addition to that, you were tasked with like an internship. And so my internship was with the hub. It was called the Pitt Vaccination Health Connection Hub, something like that. And with your internship site, you were supposed to do a project on literally anything that you and your site decided together or collaborate on. And so when I was at the hub, I was telling them like my interests. I have always been interested in like health equity. I've also been interested in reproductive health rights and things like that. And they told me about a project that I could further along. And it was a wellness vending machine project. And I was like, this is so cool. And at the time, I think now there's actually a lot of schools that have wellness vending machines.
Mhm.
Um, but at the time, like last year, it was a lot newer and not a lot of schools were having, wellness vending machines, especially not with emergency contraceptives. And so with the current political climate at the time and everything, and I was like, this is the perfect project. I really want to push this project along. And so I spent, I think, 2.5, 2-ish, 3-ish months in Pittsburgh. I was working with the campus health center, the pharmacy, and obviously the hub to um work out some of the like they were already in one of the later phases. So the campus has already been approving different things for this vending machine. But I was working on the marketing the machine, how we want to include educational materials if, someone was to get Plan B from the machine, they know how to use it, things like that. And it was really interesting being able to hear all these different perspectives on it, like from the administrative side of how we want to frame the machine so it's like palatable to everybody, how we want to stock it from the pharmacy, what the students felt like they were needing, because this was a student initiative. Like the idea came from the University of Pittsburgh's like student senate or like some student leaders.
Mhm.
And so I felt like I was navigating all these different wants and needs for people and trying to put it together in a way that would contribute to the growth of this project so that it would hopefully lead to a wellness vending machine. So to this day, I'm not sure if they've like the machines are currently up. When I left, they were literally like were about to purchase the actual machine itself. And so it was such a cool project, and I think that it's so relevant, especially now even like to what, needs college students may have in a creative and like kind of tech savvy way um to help meet those needs. So that's what I did in Pittsburgh.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. Um, let's see. Is there anything at all that you believe could have helped you more in your journey at this school?
That's a great question. I think I I honestly don't think so, but I think that I was very lucky in saying no to this question. Because I Well, for me, my family was close by, and I think that gave me some of the emotional support that I needed, even though I was kind of hesitant to go like to school so close to home. But at the end of the day, looking back now, I'm very grateful and lucky that I had that support and that my sister goes to the same school now, and so we kind of had each other, even if I felt like alone or whatever. But in terms of like opportunities at SMU, I think I honestly just feel that I was incredibly lucky to be somehow like selected to be part of DCS, like the Dedman College Scholars Program, and have made some friends through there. And so I felt like there was a community. And then I was also just, because I was in DCS and I was part of the honors program, Dr. Brandon Miller, who is, the head of like the fellowships, he was the one who told me about the CDC and told me and helped me apply. And so I got that opportunity because of the I guess not even because, but like he helped me shape my application. He recommended me to do that. And then the Fulbright that I'm doing post grad is also honestly because of his help. And so I feel like there's nothing else that I could have possibly asked for just because everything that I really, really wanted to do, like I was able to do. Even when I was starting CKI and I was like really nervous to start a new club. Yes, it was like, I don't know, difficult or like it was kind of scary and like overwhelming at times. I don't know what SMU could have possibly done to help me. I think that's just like part of the process of starting something new. And so in that sense, I feel like all of the support that I needed was there. Um, but I was just like like everything just aligned. I don't know. Like I was just very blessed to have that type of support that I did.
Great, thank you. And well, you just mentioned this, but my next question is about your Fulbright. You have, now that you've graduated, you have been awarded an English teaching assistantship to Vietnam from the Fulbright Program for the 2025 to 2026 academic year. Can you, describe the application process and what you expect to gain from this experience?
Yeah. So the application process actually started last summer.
Mhm.
Um, and we have internal deadlines. Like everyone who applies to a Fulbright at SMU has some internal deadlines to meet. I don't remember what they were off the top of my head, but I do remember I was writing essays in the summer, which feels like a really long application process. It takes about a year. And so I I think I heard about the Fulbright as a junior and I was interested in it, but I was also kind of like hesitant because it off like on the surface level, it seems very random. Like, oh, you're a pre-med, you want to go to medical school. Why would you go teach English in a foreign country? And so I wasn't really sure if I wanted to pursue that. But at the end of my junior year, I decided that I was going to take a gap year just because some other reasons from medical school. And so I had a year off between graduating college and then matriculating into medical school. And
Mhm.
I was kind of thinking to myself, like, what do I want to do during this gap year? I could do some of the current things I'm doing right now, like research, or I can get a job at a hospital, or I can, I don't know, like do any of those things that are very typical pre-med things to do for your gap year. Um, and I was prepared to do it, but I really wanted to shoot my shot. I knew how hard the program was to get in. But I also knew that I had a clear country that I wanted to go to. If I ever did a Fulbright, I knew I'd want to do it in Vietnam, just because for my family, I've seen how like learning English has opened up so many opportunities for my family members, and I just know how important that is. Even if you don't move to America, even if you stay in Vietnam, it's just such a great skill to have. And so I really wanted to give back in that sense. And so for all those reasons, I applied for a Fulbright, and then for Vietnam you have to do an interview. And so I did my interview later on around spring break. Um, and I don't remember when I found out I was a semifinalist. I think maybe like in December or something, but we didn't have our interviews until spring break. And then after that, the world kind of there was like a lot going on. And I actually thought the Fulbright program like disbanded itself. Like there was just way too much because
Mhm.
they told us that we would hear back at a certain time and then they ghosted us. And so I was kind of like, I don't know. I was just like, okay, well, I guess it's not happening. So I started applying for other jobs. And I actually got a job and I was about to sign everything for that when they were like, just kidding, you're a finalist. And I was like, what? And so I had to go back to I had to go back to my job and I felt awful because I actually was really excited to do this job. And it was a job at SMU and I was like really prepared to take that on too. And so it was just like, oh, it was a crazy whirlwind the past couple of months. Um, and because of that, everything was late. Like I just submitted my visa this past week, which is crazy. If I'm leaving in a month, like that's a very last minute thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, that was what the application process was like. I think that it was there was like pros and cons to being a heritage applicant, like someone whose parents are from there and you're applying to be part of that country. Because for one, you don't want to come off as a cliche and say like, oh well, I mean, my parents are from there, so therefore I like want to go and teach English there. Like it has to be a lot deeper than that. I think for me it was a lot deeper than that. I think the time that I spent in Vietnam this past like winter break doing research definitely made me want to do a Fulbright even more because during that experience, it was a very different experience. I was interviewing women who were going through IVF at a provincial hospital. But I think just like talking to women in Vietnam and just being in that community was really cool. And like I felt like I learned so much. And I feel like being able to teach, I'm teaching high school students, so being able to teach high school students for a full year, and not only that, but learning so much from them, learning more about the Vietnamese community, learning more about their culture, because I think like being a Vietnamese person or being a Vietnamese person in Vietnam and being a Vietnamese American is just two completely different things. I'm just really excited to learn more about it. And so I'm teaching, but I'm also learning way more than I'm teaching. Yeah.
Great. Well, congratulations. I know you're going to do great. Um, Great. So we are coming, close to the end here. I have two more questions for you. The next one is, you mentioned your sister's a student here. So what advice, have you been giving to her, and what advice will you give to her as she continues her career here?
Yeah. I think one of the I guess there's like two big pieces of advice. The first one is being intentional of what you want to do and why you're doing something. I think nowadays there's, or I don't know, maybe it's just like from me seeing, but from my personal experience, I think sometimes people do things because they think that it'll get them where they want to go. Like in the pre-med space, like, oh, I'm gonna go work as a medical assistant because I know that that's gonna get me into medical school, or I'm gonna go do this, be even though I don't like it. It's different if you like it, but if you don't like it, just doing it to check off a box. I think it's really important to be intentional about what you're doing, and people can see right through it, I guess. Like they can see when you're being raw and authentic of what you want to do. And I think that's one of the reasons why I applied for a Fulbright, because to be honest, I don't really think I want to be a medical assistant at a hospital. Like I've done that before. And so yeah, so being intentional. And I think the second thing is to never count yourself out of anything. Like even if something seems prestigious or something seems like impossible to achieve, shoot your shot anyway. Like for a lot of the things I've done at SMU, like even as a freshman when I first came here, I never thought that I'd be elected into the student senate, which is like not even that prestigious or crazy or anything. But I was just like, a pretty introverted kid growing up, and I didn't think that anyone would want to elect me to represent them in any sort of way. And so that was like the first leap of faith that I ever took at SMU, was applying to be part of the student senate. And I was shocked when I was elected, and I was super excited. And after that, like the CDC thing or the Fulbright, those are like programs that no one, or I don't think anyone should feel like, oh, I'm definitely gonna get in. Like I never felt that way about any of the things that I did. I was just trying my best, shooting my shot and seeing what happens. And so, yeah, like don't count yourself out or think that something is too prestigious for you or too up there. You really never know what might happen if you like be authentic in your application and things like that.
Thank you. Okay, my final question for you. Is there anything that you feel I may have missed which you would like to further discuss?
No, I really think you covered all your bases. Yeah, I think like my SMU experience is really like a wide array of things, and I think that you definitely touched on all of them. So honestly, no.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. This does conclude our interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to interview me. I feel so special to be part of this project. It's amazing.